I used to believe that Christmas had a particular smell. Not just cinnamon and baked turkey, but that warm scent of people who, for just one night, tried to love each other a little more than usual. For 71 years, I lived for that smell. I hosted dinners, wrapped presents until my fingers hurt, and watched my son Mark grow from a boy excited about toy cars into a man who only checked his phone during family gatherings. Still, no matter how much things had changed, Christmas at my house had always been a tradition until this year. 3 weeks before Christmas, my phone rang. I smiled when I saw my daughter-in-law's name on the screen. Emma never called me just because. It was always about Mark, the kids, or some practical favor. For a brief second, I let myself dream that maybe, just maybe, she was calling to ask about my famous cranberry pie recipe or to invite me over to help decorate their Christmas tree. I even sat up straighter on the couch, smoothing my old cardigan, as if she could see me through the phone. "Hi, Mom," she said, with that overly sweet tone she uses when she's about to say something unpleasant. She doesn't call me Mom very often. It's usually Margaret. My heart sank a little. I've learned that when someone suddenly upgrades your title, it's not affection. It's strategy. Still, I answered as kindly as I could. "Hello, dear.
How are you?
How are the kids?" I could hear some noise in the background, paper rustling, children laughing, and what sounded like Christmas music. For a second, I imagined them decorating the tree without me. Emma didn't waste much time pretending this was a friendly call. "So, about Christmas," she began, and my fingers tightened around the phone. I felt my breath slow, my chest heavy, as if my body already knew what my mind refused to accept. "This year is going to be a bit different. We're trying to keep things small. Just immediate family." Her words cut through me slowly, like a dull knife. I waited for the part where she would say, "Of course you're included." That part never came. "I see," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "And what am I, Emma, if not immediate family? I'm Mark's mother." There was a long pause on the other end. I heard her sigh, that tired, irritated sigh she gives whenever she thinks I'm being difficult. Finally, she added, "Well, we just think it might be better if you stayed home this year. To rest. The last time you were here, it was a bit stressful for everyone." I could almost hear the smirk hidden between her words. She wasn't suggesting, she was dismissing. For a moment, I couldn't answer. My mind traveled back to the last Christmas I spent at their house, the tension at the table, the way Emma snapped at the kids when they preferred my mashed potatoes over her quinoa salad, the sharp look she gave me when Mark laughed at one of my old stories instead of complimenting her new centerpiece. I remembered how, after everyone went to bed, I'd walked past the home office and heard low voices. Emma's whisper irritated, "Your mother is always in the way, Mark. We can't keep doing this." That night, I pretended I hadn't heard anything. This time, she wasn't whispering. She was telling me, clearly, to stay away. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my voice to remain steady. "So you're telling me," I said slowly, "that after hosting Christmas for this family for decades, I am no longer welcome at my own son's table?" My words hung in the air, like smoke. Emma shifted, clearly uncomfortable, but she held her ground. "It's not like that," she replied. "We just need boundaries. And honestly, the kids get too overwhelmed. It's better this way." It amazed me how easily some people lie when they think they're protecting their own comfort. I almost hung up. I almost cried. I almost begged. But instead, something very old and very quiet woke up inside me. A part of me that had been watching, listening, collecting facts while everyone assumed I was just a fragile old woman who forgot things. I took a deep breath and answered calmly, "All right, Emma. If that's what you want, I'll stay away this Christmas." I heard the relief in her exhale. She thought she had won. She had no idea what I knew. She had no idea what I had been keeping to myself, or that I had the power to destroy everything she'd built on lies. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel weak. I felt patient. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, listening to the old clock tick on the wall like it was counting down to something inevitable. I didn't cry. I didn't break. Instead, I felt a strange stillness spread through me, the kind that comes not from peace, but from clarity. Emma believed she had finally pushed me out of the family circle, as if I were some outdated ornament to be stored away with the dusty Christmas decorations. What she didn't know was that I had been watching her much longer than she had been watching me. Most people think older women don't notice things, that our eyes get weaker, our memory fades, our attention drifts. What they don't understand is that age doesn't dull perception, it sharpens it. When you've lived long enough, you learn to read people the same way you read the wrinkles on your own hands. And I had watched Emma for years, watched her lies multiply like cracks in a wall she pretended was perfectly solid. It started small. A missing pair of earrings from my jewelry box. I thought I had misplaced them. Then a necklace, my mother's pearl necklace, vanished. I searched every drawer, every box, every old coat pocket. Nothing. When I mentioned it to Mark, he shrugged and said, "Maybe you loaned it to someone and forgot." That stung more than the theft. Not because he dismissed me, but because he genuinely believed I was capable of forgetting something so precious. Emma kept quiet during that conversation, but I saw the way her hand tightened around her phone, the way her eyes darted away when I looked at her. Then came the withdrawals from my account. Small, precise amounts. Never enough to trigger alerts, but just enough to be noticeable if someone paid attention. And I always paid attention. My late husband, God rest his soul, taught me long ago that numbers don't lie, people do. I confronted the bank manager, and he explained something that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Thompson, these withdrawals were authorized with your secondary signature." Secondary signature. Emma had access. I didn't remember giving it to her, but she had it. One afternoon, when I visited their house, I walked past the kitchen and heard Emma laughing on the phone. "She won't notice," she whispered. "She barely knows what day it is. Trust me, it's easy." The cruelty of those words cut deeper than any theft. That was the moment I decided not to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I began documenting everything: dates, amounts, missing items, conversations. I kept it all in a small notebook, hidden inside an old cookbook. The same cookbook Emma hated because it reminded Mark of traditional food, her polite way of saying my cooking was better. But the final piece, the one that tied everything together, came last Christmas. I arrived early to help set up, but Emma had already decorated the living room. When she stepped outside to take a call, I walked over to the tree to admire the ornaments. That's when I saw them. 2 of my missing jewelry pieces, hanging on the branches like they were part of the decor. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no. My pearl brooch, my sapphire earrings, disguised as ornaments. As if mocking me. I didn't touch them. I didn't tell Mark. I simply stood there, staring at the glittering lies in plain sight, and something inside me hardened. It wasn't about the jewelry anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about respect, identity, place. She wanted to erase me, not just from Christmas, but from my own family history. What she didn't know was that the one thing she feared most was already written down, already notarized, already sealed, and I was the only one who knew where the papers were kept. So when Emma told me to stay away this Christmas, she thought she was finally freeing herself from me. I simply smiled at the empty room and whispered, "My dear, you have no idea what's coming." After Emma's phone call, I made myself a cup of tea and walked into my late husband's study, a room Emma always avoided, perhaps because it smelled of old books, leather, and a type of authority she knew she could never manipulate. My husband, Richard, had been a quiet man, but he had a presence that filled every corner of a space. Even now, years after his passing, that room felt alive, as if he were sitting just out of sight, waiting for me to finally use what he left behind. The desk was an old mahogany piece, heavy and impossible for Emma to move. She once suggested getting rid of it because it was too big, but Mark refused. My husband loved that desk. Every drawer, every hidden compartment had been carefully crafted. He used to joke that it held family secrets long before the world ever used that phrase to sell books or gossip shows. I sat down slowly, letting my fingers trace the carved edges, remembering how many nights he prepared documents here while I brought him hot cocoa. There was a bottom drawer, he always kept locked. After his passing, he gave me the key. Not a digital password, not a modern safe, a simple brass key on a string. "You'll know when to use it," he had said. At the time, I thought he meant for sentimental reasons. Now, I wasn't so sure. I retrieved the key from my jewelry box and inserted it into the lock. It clicked with an elegant finality, almost as if the desk itself had been waiting for this moment. Inside, beneath old photo albums and a few letters tied with ribbon, was a thick envelope marked with my name in Richard's handwriting. My heart thumped at the sight of it. He had always been a man who believed in preparing for storms before the clouds even appeared. I took the envelope out gently, sat back in the chair, and opened it. Inside was a stack of documents, all neatly arranged: bank statements, property deeds, investment records, and a revised version of his will. A will I had never seen. My breath caught as I read through it. Richard had rewritten it shortly before he died, without telling anyone but me. Not even Mark knew. In this version, everything, the house, the savings, the lake cabin, even his family heirlooms, were left under my sole control until the day I passed. Only then would the inheritance be divided. And if anyone had attempted to manipulate, deceive, or financially exploit me in any way, that person would be legally removed from the inheritance. The clause was crystal clear, airtight, and notarized. But the part that made my hands tremble wasn't the clause itself. It was the addendum beneath it. Richard had written something personal. "If Emma ever mistreats you, Margaret, use this. I trust your judgment more than I trust her intentions." I had to sit there for several minutes, letting the words sink into me like a bomb and a warning at the same time. He had seen her character long before I admitted it to myself. He had protected me before he died, giving me the power I didn't even know I would need one day. At the bottom of the envelope was something else, a small USB drive. I plugged it into my old laptop, expecting perhaps scanned documents or photos. Instead, I found video files. Footage from the security cameras in the house, specifically from the day Emma helped me organize my jewelry boxes while Mark was away. There she was, reaching into the drawers, slipping pieces into her purse, then texting someone with a smile on her face. Evidence. Undeniable evidence. I closed the laptop slowly, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in years. Emma thought she held all the cards: youth, influence, manipulation. But she had forgotten one thing. My husband never underestimated me. And now, with everything in my hands, I held the one secret Emma feared most. As I placed the envelope back on the desk, a thought crossed my mind. Christmas would be very different this year, but not in the way she expected. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in my bed listening to the winter wind tapping against the windows, as if the world itself were urging me to wake up to the truth. My mind replayed Emma's voice again and again. "We think it's better if you stay home this year." The cruelty behind her words didn't hurt anymore. No, what kept me awake wasn't pain, it was clarity. A plan was beginning to form, slow and deliberate, just like the way Richard used to build his wooden ships and bottles. I rose quietly, put on my slippers, and walked back to the study. The envelope was still on the desk, its contents illuminated by the soft yellow glow of the lamp. I sat in Richard's old chair and opened the will again, reading every line with meticulous attention. The clause excluding any manipulative family member wasn't just symbolic, it was legally binding. And with the records of Emma's withdrawals, the security footage of her theft, and my own documented notes, she wouldn't just be questioned. She would be removed from the inheritance entirely. But I didn't want a legal battle. I didn't want public humiliation. I didn't want to scar my grandchildren. I wanted something more precise, something that would teach Emma exactly what Christmas should mean, and at the same time, secure my son's future without the influence of a woman who saw me as an obstacle. I wanted a revelation, not revenge. A truth delivered so cleanly that even she could not twist it. So I began writing a letter. A long, careful letter addressed not to Emma, but to Mark. I wrote about the missing jewelry, the unauthorized withdrawals, the overheard conversations, and the Christmas ornaments adorned with my stolen heirlooms. I included dates, amounts, and descriptions. I told him about the will and the clause. And I told him something I had never admitted out loud, that I knew he was torn between us, but he didn't have to be anymore. The truth would set him free. Then, I prepared a second envelope. This one was for Emma. Inside it, I placed a single USB drive, the one containing the footage of her stealing from my jewelry boxes. I added a handwritten note. You told me to stay away this Christmas. I will, but not for the reason you think. I sealed both envelopes and placed them on the desk. That's when I heard the old grandfather clock in the hallway chime midnight. Something shifted in me at that moment. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a guardian, like someone finally stepping into a role she had been avoiding, the role my husband always believed I was capable of. But even with the envelopes ready, I wasn't finished. The final piece of my plan required timing, precision, and a little bit of courage. If Emma wanted a Christmas without me, she would have it, but she would also receive the truth she had been running from for years. And Mark, my sweet Mark, would finally see the woman he had married for who she truly was. As I stood up, something inside me settled. This Christmas wouldn't be about exclusion. It would be about revelation. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of purpose, the kind I hadn't felt since Richard was alive. I made my usual breakfast, oatmeal with honey and a cup of strong tea, but everything tasted different, sharper, clearer. The house felt heavier too, as if it understood that something important was about to unfold. I placed the 2 envelopes in my cardigan pocket and sat by the window, watching the frost melt on the grass while I rehearsed in my mind what I would say when the moment came. But as life often reminds us, the moments we plan are rarely the moments that matter. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a knock on the door. 3 short taps, uncertain and hesitant. My first thought was that it might be a delivery. My second thought, and the one that hit harder, was that it might be Mark. I walked slowly to the door, heart trembling with a mixture of hope and worry. When I opened it, there he stood, my son, looking exhausted, unshaven, and strangely nervous, as if he were carrying a weight he didn't know how to drop. "Mom," he said softly, hands deep in his coat pockets. "Can we talk?" For a moment, emotion tightened my throat. He hadn't come to visit alone in a very long time. Normally Emma was glued to his side, controlling every schedule, every outing, every conversation. But here he was, alone, on the very morning after she told me to stay away from Christmas. It didn't take a genius to realize something had happened. I stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. "Of course, dear. Sit wherever you like." He chose the armchair across from me, the one he used to curl up in as a child when I read him stories. He didn't look comfortable now. He kept glancing around the room like he was searching for something lost. "Mom, did Emma call you yesterday?" I took a measured breath. "Yes, she did." He rubbed his forehead, the way he does when he's overwhelmed. "She told me afterward. She said you handled it well." I wasn't sure what that meant. His eyes lifted to mine, full of confusion and maybe even guilt. "Did she really tell you not to come for Christmas?" I nodded slowly. She did. Mark closed his eyes, as if absorbing a blow. For a moment he didn't speak. I could see a storm building behind his expression, a storm he had kept hidden from me for years. When he finally looked at me again, his voice was tight. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have known this was coming. I should have stopped it." I leaned back, studying him. This wasn't the reaction Emma would have wanted from him. She expected compliance, not resistance. Something had changed. Something significant. "Mark," I asked gently, "what happened?" He hesitated before answering, choosing his words carefully. "I overheard a conversation last night. Emma was talking to someone on the phone. She didn't know I was listening." His jaw clenched. "She said she was tired of pretending, tired of being held back by us. And then she said something about how after Christmas, things would be easier once she had full control." My heart began pounding. Full control. Over what? Over who? Before I could ask, he continued, voice cracking. "Then she said, you were the last obstacle." I felt the room tilt slightly, but I stayed composed. Richard always said that truth reveals itself when we stop forcing answers. This was the truth beginning to seep out. Mark's hands trembled. Mom, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what she's planning. But I came here because I think I might have made a terrible mistake marrying her. For the first time in years, I saw the little boy I had raised, vulnerable, overwhelmed, desperate for guidance. And for the first time in years, I realized he wasn't blinded by love anymore. He was waking up. I reached into my cardigan and touched the envelopes, feeling the edges against my fingertips. I had planned to deliver them on Christmas Eve, but life once again had its own timing. Mark sat forward on the edge of the armchair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as though the answers to his life were hidden in the fibers of the carpet. I had seen my son overwhelmed before, grief when his father died, worry when his children were born premature. But this was different. This was the expression of a man realizing that his marriage might be built on something rotten. And he didn't yet know just how deep the rot went. Mom, he said quietly, I need you to be honest with me. Is there something I should know about Emma? Something you haven't told me. There it was. The opening. The invitation. The moment my plan had been patiently waiting for. But I didn't rush. Truth, when delivered at the wrong speed, can destroy more than it heals. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at him with the same calm I used to have when soothing him after nightmares. What exactly are you asking me, dear? I whispered. He lifted his eyes, and they were full of fear. Do you think Emma loves us? Me? The kids? You? The question was so raw that it took my breath for a moment. I reached out and placed my hand on his. Mark, I think Emma loves the life she built, the appearance of a perfect family. But love isn't about appearances. It's about truth. And that's where she struggles. He swallowed hard. Mom, has she ever done anything to hurt you? My instinct as a mother was to soften the truth, to protect him from pain. But the truth had grown too large to hide. I tightened my fingers around the edge of the envelope inside my pocket and answered softly. Yes, Mark. She has. He went completely still. What did she do? I took a long breath, letting the words come slowly, intentionally, not to punish him, but to free him from the illusion he had been living under. Your father's jewelry, the pieces you think I lost. They didn't disappear. He blinked, confused. What do you mean? They were taken, I said, by Emma. He recoiled slightly, like someone slapped him. No. Mom, no. That can't be right. I reached across to him and placed my hand on his cheek, guiding him gently to meet my gaze. I know this is hard to hear, but I saw the footage, Mark. I have the evidence. His face drained of color. Footage. Yes, I whispered. Security recordings your father installed years before he passed. They captured her taking the jewelry. And that isn't all she took. He pressed a hand against his forehead, shaking. Oh my God. Oh my God. I continued, steady and firm, because someone in that room needed to be strong, and it had to be me. There have been withdrawals from my bank account. Small amounts over time. Amounts she authorized using the access she shouldn't have had. Mark's breathing grew shallow. She stole from you? Yes. For a long time, he didn't speak. He just stared at the window as the December wind rattled the glass. I could almost see the memories rewiring themselves in his mind. All the excuses, all the misunderstandings, all the little conflicts Emma had engineered to make him doubt me instead of her. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, Mom, why didn't you tell me? A question so simple, yet so heartbreakingly complex. Because, I murmured, you loved her. And I wasn't going to be the reason your marriage fell apart. I trusted that the truth would reveal itself in time. And now it has. He looked at me with eyes full of grief, anger, betrayal, emotions he had never allowed himself to feel before. Mom, what do I do now? I reached for the envelopes, slowly removing them from my cardigan. One marked with his name, the other with Emma's. You open yours, I said softly, and you deliver hers. His fingers trembled as he held the envelopes. He looked at them like they were explosives, and in a way they were. Not bombs meant to destroy, but truths meant to reshape everything. He exhaled shakily. I don't know what will happen, but I need to know. I nodded. And you deserve to. Mark stood up, gripping the envelopes like they were the handles of a new life he wasn't ready to face yet. But he was going to face it anyway. And Emma was about to learn that keeping me away from Christmas was the smallest mistake she had made. Mark left my house with the envelopes in his coat pocket, walking with the heavy steps of a man who had just discovered that the ground beneath him wasn't solid after all. I watched from the window as he got into his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he sat there, motionless, staring straight ahead. The way someone stares before stepping into a cold ocean they know will shock their body, but cleanse them at the same time. From where I stood, I could see enough of his silhouette to understand the storm happening inside him. The doubt, the disbelief, the horrifying realization that the woman he married, the mother of his children, had been lying to him for years, not just in small ways, but in ways that carved into the foundation of their entire family. And the worst part, the part that would haunt him, was knowing that she had done it quietly, strategically, while smiling at him across dinner tables and kissing their children goodnight. Finally, Mark started the car. The engine rumbled to life, but he didn't drive off immediately. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel and exhaled a long, defeated breath, one that fogged the windshield and made the morning frost blur even more. I wished for a moment that I could soften his pain, that I could give him a gentler truth. But life doesn't work like that. And neither does betrayal. He eventually pulled out of the driveway, but I could tell from the way he drove, cautious, slow, almost drifting, that he wasn't heading straight home. He needed space, air, and maybe a memory of a simpler time. Mark had a habit of driving to the lake when he was overwhelmed. He used to go there as a teenager whenever school pressures or heartbreaks became too much. Richard used to say, "A man thinks more clearly near water." Maybe that was where he was headed now, envelopes on the passenger seat like ghosts he couldn't shake. As he drove, I imagined every thought passing through his mind. Why didn't I see it? How long has this been happening? What else has she lied about? How could she do this to my mother? What will this mean for the children? And beneath it all, a softer, more devastating question. Was our marriage ever real? When Mark reached the lake, I knew he would. He parked in the same old spot he used when he was 17. He texted me once, "I'm reading everything now." Nothing more. No punctuation. My heart tightened. He opened his envelope first. I had written every word carefully, not to break him, but to show him what had been hidden in the shadows of his marriage. He read about the missing jewelry, the withdrawals, the overheard phone calls, the way Emma positioned herself as the center of the household by slowly cutting me out. He read about the footage, the documents, the will, the clause. And then he found the final paragraph, the one I had debated including. "Mark, I didn't tell you because you loved her. But now you deserve to love yourself, too." He stayed at the lake for nearly an hour. I know because he texted me again, this time with trembling honesty. "Mom, I'm shaking. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't want to know." I sent only one message back. "Come home when you're ready." But Mark didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, he drove toward the one place he feared the most at that moment, the house he shared with the woman whose entire world was about to collapse. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He wasn't ready for confrontation. Not yet. He was a man stepping into a truth he had avoided for years. And Emma was completely unaware that the life she built on lies was about to catch fire. Mark drove home with a calmness that did not match the storm inside him. His hands were steady on the wheel, his breathing slow, almost deliberate, the eerie quiet that settles over a person right before their world breaks open. When he finally parked in the driveway, the curtains in the living room fluttered slightly. Emma was watching. Of course she was. She always watched when she thought control might slip through her fingers. She opened the front door before he reached it, forcing a bright smile onto her face. "Mark, where have you been? I was worried." Her voice was honeyed, But her eyes were scanning him, searching for answers she couldn't yet see, but could sense were coming. Mark didn't smile back. He didn't hug her. He didn't even take off his coat. "Emma," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Her expression flickered for a moment, a crack in the porcelain mask, then she glided back into performance mode. "Of course. Come inside, it's cold." She reached for his hand, but he stepped past her, walking straight into the living room. With each step, her anxiety grew like a shadow behind him. He sat on the couch. She stayed standing. "What's wrong?" she finally asked, her voice tightening. Mark didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the envelope addressed to her, the one containing the USB drive. He held it for a long second, staring at it, then placed it on the coffee table. Emma froze. The moment she saw her name written in my handwriting, her entire posture shifted. Her shoulders tensed. Her jaw clenched for a fraction of a second. She recognized my handwriting immediately, but more importantly, she recognized the threat behind it. "What is that?" she asked, almost whispering. "It's for you," Mark said. "Mom asked me to give it to you." Emma didn't move. She didn't blink. She looked at the envelope the way someone looks at a venomous snake. Dangerous, alive, unpredictable. "Why?" she asked after a long pause. "What's in it?" Mark didn't soften the blow. "You should open it." Emma reached out slowly, as though her hand weighed 50 pounds. She picked up the envelope, turned it over, and stared at the back flap. Her fingers trembled. For a moment, she seemed to know, truly know, that whatever was inside would change everything. She opened it. Inside was the USB drive. Nothing else. No greeting. No explanation. Just a single sentence on a narrow slip of paper. "Play it." Emma's throat tightened. "Mark, what is this?" But he didn't answer. He simply nodded toward the TV. With shaking hands, she walked to the laptop connected to the television, inserted the USB drive, and clicked the file labeled only with the day she had helped me organize my jewelry boxes. The footage began. The living room filled with the quiet sound of a door opening, then closing. Emma appeared on the screen. But not this Emma. Not the beautifully put-together wife, the attentive mother, the considerate daughter-in-law she performed for everyone. No. This was the real Emma. Eyes sharp, movements calculated, expression cold with entitlement. Mark watched silently. Emma watched herself in horror. On the screen, she went through my drawers. Piece by piece, she slipped jewelry into her purse. She even paused to try on a necklace in the reflection of my mirror. Then she took out her phone and whispered, "Don't worry. She won't notice. I'm saving us." Emma gasped out loud. "Mark, this is out of context." He didn't let her finish. "There is no context that makes stealing from my mother acceptable." Her voice cracked. "It wasn't like that. She told you about this because she wants to turn you against me." Mark finally stood up. "Emma, Mom didn't show me this. I found it today." She stared at him, stunned. "You found it? At her house?" "No," he said quietly. "At Dad's. He left it for her. For us. He must have known." Emma's face drained of all color. Mark continued, voice trembling not with anger, but with the heartbreak of a man seeing truth without filter. "How long has this been going on? How much did you take? What else have you lied about?" Emma stepped back, shaking her head wildly. "Mark, please listen, I didn't mean..." But she stopped when she saw something else on the screen. A second file. Another date. And another. And another. Her crimes weren't accidents. They were habits. "Stop," she whispered. "Turn it off. Turn it off." Mark didn't move. He let the footage keep playing. Emma collapsed onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. "Mark, please. I can explain." But he wasn't listening. Because at that moment he finally understood. This wasn't the woman he thought he had married. This wasn't the life he thought he had built. And this Christmas, he would never look at her the same again. Emma sat frozen, her hands trembling over her mouth as the footage continued to expose every carefully hidden lie she had constructed over the years. The living room, decorated with warm Christmas lights and neatly wrapped gifts, suddenly felt like a courtroom. The glittering ornaments reflected the cold truth playing on the TV screen, transforming the room into a stage where her double life unraveled in front of the only audience that truly mattered, her husband. Mark stood motionless, arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched so hard that a thin muscle pulsed near his temple. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't even crying. And that terrified Emma more than if he had exploded. Silence from a gentle man is the loudest judgment of all. When Mark loved, he loved quietly but deeply. When he was betrayed, the quiet became something far more devastating. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped toward him. "You don't understand. I only did that because—" He cut her off, voice low and razor-sharp. "I understand exactly what I just watched." She flinched as though struck. "I understand," he continued, "that you've been taking advantage of my mother. I understand that you've been lying to me for years. I understand that you've been planning something that involved shutting her out, so you could have more control." His eyes burned with a grief deeper than rage. "What I don't understand, Emma, is how you convinced yourself this was love." Emma shook her head violently. "It was love. Everything I did for us, for our family. Your mother, she always tried to control everything. She made me feel small, like I didn't belong. She judged me. No," Mark said sharply, stepping closer. "She welcomed you. She defended you. She gave you the benefit of the doubt, even when I didn't." He swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "Emma, she loved you like a daughter. And you repaid her by stealing from her." Emma's breath hitched. Tears streamed down her face, but Mark didn't move to comfort her. He simply watched her with the painful detachment of a man who finally saw the truth without distortion. It was the moment Emma had feared most, the moment she could no longer manipulate, redirect, or disguise her intentions. Suddenly, her expression changed. Something dark flickered beneath her desperation, a spark of indignation, even anger. "So what now?" she whispered bitterly. "Are you going to leave me? Throw everything away over a few pieces of jewelry?" Mark stared at her, stunned. Is that really what you think this is about?" Emma looked away, jaw clenched. "Your mother has always hated me. She's been trying to turn you against me from the beginning." Mark took a deep breath and removed the second envelope from his coat, the one he had already opened at the lake. He placed it on the table beside the USB drive. "Mom didn't turn me against you. You did that all on your own." Emma hesitated, then snatched the envelope and opened it. Her eyes scanned the pages, dates, bank statements, notes, descriptions of her words and behavior, and finally the updated will with the inheritance clause. Each line struck her like a blow. Her breath came out in a strangled gasp. She can't do this." "She already has," Mark said quietly. Emma's hands trembled uncontrollably. "You're siding with her over me?" Mark answered with a painful honesty she wasn't prepared for. "I'm siding with the truth." She stumbled backward, bumping into the Christmas tree. Ornaments rattled, one falling and shattering at her feet, the sound slicing through the room like an omen. Finally, Mark spoke the words she had always feared most. "I need space. You need help. And until then, I don't want you anywhere near Mom. Not after what you've done." Terror flashed in Emma's eyes. "Mark, no, please. You can't." But he walked away, heading toward the stairs, his voice flat and final. "You told her to stay away this Christmas. Now it's your turn." As Mark disappeared up the steps, Emma collapsed onto the floor, surrounded by broken ornaments and her own unraveling reflection. For the first time, she realized something. Losing control wasn't her worst fear. Losing Mark was. Christmas morning arrived quietly, without the usual warmth of children's laughter or the clatter of baking trays in the kitchen. Snow fell softly outside my window, settling on the branches like powdered sugar, but my house remained still. I sat in my rocking chair, wrapped in one of Richard's old sweaters, sipping tea while the clock ticked steadily on the wall. It had been decades since I'd spent Christmas morning entirely alone, not because I lacked family, but because they had always insisted on having me close. This time was different, and yet I felt no sadness. Only anticipation. The house phone rang just after 9. Not many people call landlines anymore. That alone made my heart beat a little faster. I reached for the receiver, expecting perhaps a neighbor or my sister. But when I lifted it to my ear, I heard the shaky breathing before the voice, a voice cracked, drained, unfamiliar in its vulnerability. "Margaret, it's me, Emma." For a moment, I said nothing. I let the silence sit between us like a mirror, forcing her to see her own reflection. She must have been crying for hours. Her voice sounded hollow, scraped raw from pleading. I didn't know who else to call," she whispered. "Mark won't talk to me. He took the kids and left early this morning. He wouldn't even tell me where they're spending the holiday." Her breath faltered. "He said he needed to protect them from me." The words trembled, soaked in disbelief, as though she still hadn't fully accepted the consequences of her own choices. I felt no triumph in hearing her pain, only clarity. Life has a way of returning to us exactly what we send out. Emma had planted seeds of deceit, and now she was harvesting the winter they produced. "Why are you calling me, Emma?" I asked softly, not unkindly, but firmly. She swallowed hard. "Because I need to understand what's happening. I never meant for things to go this far. I didn't think her voice cracked again. I didn't think I'd lose everything." I closed my eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of her words. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry because she had been caught. That distinction mattered more than anything. "You told me to stay away this Christmas," I said gently. "And now you've discovered that decisions have a way of circling back." She let out a soft sob. "I was angry. I felt judged. I felt like you were always watching me." "I was," I replied, "because Richard was." Silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath, as though she'd been struck. "You knew," she whispered. "All this time, you knew what I was doing." "Yes." "And you didn't stop me." "No," I said calmly. "I didn't need to. The truth always reveals itself. People will show you who they are if you give them enough rope." The line went quiet except for Emma's unsteady breathing. She was breaking, not loudly, but in a painful, defeated way. A way that said she was finally seeing the full picture. Is he gone for good?" I let out a slow breath. "That's not for me to say." But he asked her space. "It's a sign you should take seriously." "Margaret." Her voice trembled, small and frightened. "What do you want from me? What do I have to do to fix this?" I paused, carefully choosing my words. "I don't want anything from you, but you need to start wanting something real from yourself. Not control. Not appearances. Not excuses." I softened my tone. "You need to tell the truth, to Mark, to your children, to yourself. Until then, nothing will be fixed." Emma sobbed quietly on the other end. "I don't know how to be that person." "Then this is your chance to learn," I said. "Christmas is about redemption, Emma. But redemption requires honesty." There was a long pause. Then, in a voice so small it hardly belonged to the woman who once tried to control everything, she asked, Will you talk to me again?" "One day." "Perhaps," I answered. "When you're ready to be someone your children can look up to." She cried harder. Not theatrically, not manipulatively, but with the rawness of someone finally facing herself. Before she hung up, she whispered, "Thank you for answering." When I set the phone down, I felt Richard's presence in the room, steady, warm, approving. The truth had finally begun its work. And Christmas morning, as quiet as it was, felt more peaceful than it had in years. Later that afternoon, I was in the kitchen preparing a simple Christmas lunch for myself when I heard a gentle knock at the door. It wasn't frantic or hesitant. It was soft, familiar, almost hopeful. When I opened it, Mark stood there with the children bundled in coats, their noses pink from the cold. He looked tired, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that hadn't been there in a long time, as if the weight on his shoulders had shifted just enough for him to breathe again. Mom, he said quietly, is it okay if we spend Christmas here? The children peeked from behind him, unsure, waiting for my approval the way they used to when they were little, and wanted an extra cookie. My heart lifted. I stepped aside and opened my arms. Of course it is, I said softly. You're home. They rushed inside, their tiny boots thudding on the wooden floor, bringing life back into the house with their laughter and excitement. Mark lingered near the doorway, guilt lingering on his face. I'm sorry, he said, voice low, for all the years you spent feeling unwelcome, for everything I didn't see. I reached out, touching his cheek gently. Mark, love blinds us all at times. What matters is what we do once the truth arrives. He nodded, swallowing hard, then looked around the house like he was rediscovering memories he had forgotten. We sat together in the living room as the kids played near the tree, their small voices filling the silence in the most healing way. Mark watched them quietly before speaking again. I don't know what's going to happen with Emma, he said, but today, I just want to be here. With you. With the kids. Somewhere safe. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, not triumph, not vindication, but a deep sense of restoration. As I served lunch, something unexpected happened. Mark looked at the table, at the simple dishes I had prepared, and said, Mom, will you host Christmas every year? Like before? His voice trembled slightly, as if asking that question carried a lifetime of regret. I smiled, feeling Richard's spirit in the room. I never stopped wanting to, I replied. Christmas had returned to my home, not because I fought for a place at someone else's table, but because truth has a way of bringing people back to where they belong. While Mark and the children spent the afternoon settling into a peaceful rhythm at my house, Emma was living a very different Christmas. She sat alone in her living room, the cold glow of the Christmas tree casting long shadows across the floor. Wrapping paper, half-open boxes, and untouched gifts lay scattered around her, a scene that should have felt festive, but instead resembled the aftermath of a storm she had created herself. For the first time in years, the silence in her home wasn't comforting. It was condemning. She kept checking her phone, hoping for a message from Mark. Every time the screen lit up, her breath caught, only to fall again when she saw nothing from him. No apology. No explanation. Not even a request to come home. Just absence. And absence, she realized, hurts more than anger. Anger means someone still cares. Silence means they've stepped away. She wiped her face with trembling hands, replaying everything she had seen on the USB drive. The lies. The theft. The twisted justifications she'd told herself. Now, stripped of excuses, she finally felt the weight of what she had done. As the hours passed, she wandered through the house like a ghost. She entered the children's rooms, touching their toys, their books, their soft blankets, all reminders that she was their mother, and yet her actions had jeopardized the very family she claimed to protect. She sank to the edge of her son's bed and buried her face in her hands. What have I done? She whispered, her voice cracking under the truth she could no longer outrun. It wasn't just fear of losing Mark that consumed her. It was the realization that she had crossed a moral line and couldn't step back from it. She had betrayed a woman who had done nothing but welcome her. She had stolen from someone who trusted her. And she had justified it all in the name of control, pretending it was love. The shame was suffocating. For the first time, she wasn't trying to defend herself. She was trying to understand herself, and that was far more painful. When her phone finally buzzed, Emma lunged for it, heart hammering. But the message wasn't from Mark. It was from his sister, a woman who rarely got involved. The text was short, sharp, and devastating. I know what you did. Fix yourself before you destroy anyone else. Emma dropped the phone and pressed both hands against her mouth to stifle her sobs. The consequences were no longer just between her and Mark. The truth had begun to ripple through the family, touching every corner she had tried to manipulate. As night approached, she wrapped herself in a blanket and sat on the floor beside the tree, staring at a broken ornament Mark had stepped on earlier that morning. Its shattered pieces reflected fragments of her own life, A life she had worked so hard to present perfectly, now cracked beyond repair. She had never felt smaller or more alone. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the first consequence. Others were coming. She closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet room, "I need help." It wasn't a manipulation. It wasn't a performance. It was the first honest thing she had said in years. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep on the couch wrapped in blankets, Mark stood by the kitchen window with a heavy look on his face. Snowflakes drifted past the glass in slow, quiet spirals, and he watched them as though searching for answers hidden in their fall. I knew that expression well. It was the same one he had as a child when he was about to confess something painful. A truth he wasn't sure he was ready to speak, but one he could no longer keep inside. I walked to the counter and poured him a cup of tea, setting it beside him without a word. He nodded gratefully, but didn't take a sip. His hands remained in his pockets, shoulders tense, breathing shallow. Finally, he swallowed hard and spoke in a low voice. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said years ago." I turned toward him slowly, giving him space to choose his words. He kept his eyes on the window, as if looking at me directly would make the confession more difficult. "Emma didn't start pulling away from you on her own," he said. I let it happen. I stopped defending you because it was easier, because I didn't want to argue." His voice cracked slightly. "And because I didn't want to see what she was really becoming." His admission wasn't angry or dramatic. It was filled with a quiet remorse that pierced deeper than any apology. He finally turned toward me, and the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. "You always told me to look at people's actions, not their words. But I ignored every sign, every missing piece, every moment you looked hurt. I convinced myself everything was normal." He shook his head. "I failed you." I stepped closer, placing my hand gently on his arm. "Mark, you didn't fail me. You trusted the woman you loved. That isn't a failure." But he pressed his lips together, struggling to accept forgiveness he didn't feel he deserved. "Maybe. But I failed myself. I failed the kids. I let someone manipulate all of us." He sank into a kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands. When I watched that footage today, it broke something inside me. Not just the betrayal, but the realization that I allowed it to get this far. His voice softened into a whisper. "I let her isolate me. I let her convince me you were the problem." He looked up at me, eyes red. "You weren't the problem. You were the warning." My heart tightened at those words. Not from anger, but from the deep ache of a mother who watched her child walk through fire she could have protected him from if he had only let her. But this was his lesson, not mine. And he was learning it now with courage and humility. "There's something else," he said, exhaling shakily. "Emma's been trying to get power of attorney for months." That startled me, but not as much as his next sentence. "And she told her mother that once she had it, she'd put you in a care facility. Said it would make things simpler." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The kitchen felt colder, the hum of the refrigerator harsher, the ticking of the clock louder. Mark wiped his face with trembling fingers. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself it was gossip, misunderstanding, exaggeration. But after today, I know it was true. I sat beside him, placing my hand over his. "You see the truth now. That's what matters." He nodded slowly, but the sadness didn't leave his eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry. More than I can say." I squeezed his hand gently. "You don't need to apologize anymore. You're here, with your children, with the truth. That's all I ever wanted." He exhaled a long, heavy breath, like he was releasing years of tension. "I'm not going back home tonight," he said. "And I don't know what the next step is." I touched his shoulder. "One step at a time. You don't need to solve everything today." He looked at me softer now. I want to protect you, the way Dad would have wanted." My voice warmed. "You already are." In that moment, something shifted in him. The beginning of healing, of reclaiming his own strength. And in the quiet kitchen, on a Christmas night shaped by painful truths, I realized something too. This wasn't the end of their family. It was the beginning of its restoration. Children understand far more than adults give them credit for. They may not grasp the complexity of betrayal or the weight of adult decisions, but they feel shifts in the air, the tension in a room, the silence between two voices, the worry hidden behind a parent's smile. That night, as Mark and I spoke in quiet tones in the kitchen, the children were not asleep for long. Before we knew it, small footsteps padded across the hallway, and two sleepy faces peeked around the corner, eyes wide and uncertain. "Daddy," his daughter whispered, rubbing her eyes. "Are we sleeping here tonight?" Mark softened immediately, kneeling down and opening his arms. Both kids rushed to him, clutching his shoulders tightly. They didn't ask many questions, but the way they held onto him said everything. They had sensed something shifting at home, the raised voices, the closed doors, the heavy energy following their mother like a shadow. Mark nodded, stroking their hair gently. "Yes, sweetheart. We're staying with Grandma tonight." The youngest looked up at me with a fragile hope. "Is Mommy coming too?" The question hung in the air like a delicate ornament ready to fall and shatter. I crouched down beside them and smiled softly. "Mommy is resting tonight, dear. She needs some time to think." They accepted the answer more easily than an adult would. Children don't look for blame the way grown-ups do. They look for safety. And tonight, safety was here. I helped them settle on the couch again, tucking fresh blankets around their small bodies. As I adjusted the pillows, the older one, Mark's daughter, looked up at me with a seriousness far beyond her years. "Grandma," she whispered, "Mommy cries a lot when nobody sees." My heart tightened. Such innocence. Such honesty. I brushed a curl from her forehead. "Sometimes grown-ups forget to ask for help," I said gently. "But she will be okay." It wasn't a promise. It was hope wrapped in truth. She nodded slowly, leaning into my hand before closing her eyes. Mark stood in the doorway watching, and I saw his expression soften in a way that told me he was absorbing something important, a reminder that his choices didn't affect just himself or his wife. They rippled through the hearts of the little ones sleeping under my roof tonight. He swallowed hard and whispered, "I can't let them go back into that environment until things change." I nodded. "And they won't. They're safe here." His shoulders eased, but the worry in his eyes remained. Truth had shaken his marriage, but the children were the reason he couldn't simply walk away. They were the compass guiding him toward the next steps, even if those steps were painful. As the house grew quiet again, Mark looked at me with a heavy sincerity. "Mom, I don't know what Christmas is supposed to be anymore." I placed my hand gently on his arm. "Christmas," I said softly, "isn't about having a perfect family. It's about telling the truth, starting fresh, and protecting the people who need us most." He nodded, letting the words sink into him. And as the children drifted back to sleep, wrapped in warmth and innocence, I felt a quiet certainty. They knew something was wrong, but for the first time in a long while, they also felt safe. While we settled into a strange but peaceful rhythm in my home, Emma's house remained frozen in the aftermath of her unraveling. After hours of crying and pacing, she finally stood up with a sudden determination, not clarity, but desperation. She grabbed her coat, wiped her face with trembling hands, and walked out into the cold December night. The air bit against her cheeks, but she barely felt it. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in that house another second. Not alone. Not with her thoughts echoing off the walls. Emma walked aimlessly at first, her breath forming shaky clouds in the air. She passed the glowing windows of neighbors celebrating Christmas, families gathered around warm tables, children laughing, music drifting softly into the street. With each scene, the reality of her isolation sank deeper. She had spent years trying to craft the perfect image, the perfect home, the perfect marriage, the perfect control. Now she was wandering the night with nothing but guilt wrapped around her like a thin coat that couldn't keep out the cold. Eventually, she reached a small park a few blocks away, the same park where she used to take the kids when they were toddlers. She sat on a bench beneath a flickering street lamp, the snow crunching under her boots as she shifted her weight. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone again. Dozens of unread messages from her family blinked on the screen. Cousins wishing Merry Christmas, her mother asking where the kids were, a friend sharing a holiday picture. But nothing from Mark. Nothing from the children. Nothing from the life she feared she was losing. She closed her eyes and leaned back, letting the cold seep into her bones. I ruined everything, she whispered to the empty air. And for once, the universe did not argue. She could see now the trail of small choices that had led her here, the casual lies, the entitlement, the belief that she could manipulate her way into control without ever facing consequences. She didn't realize until this moment that she had been lying not just to others, but to herself. After almost an hour, her phone buzzed. Her heart leapt, but when she checked, it was a message from Mark's sister. Only 5 words. He took them to Mom's. Emma's breath hitched. She knew exactly what that meant. She stood abruptly, her knees weak, and began pacing in the snow. She wanted to run to my house, beg for forgiveness, demand to see the children, but she knew she couldn't. Not after everything that had come to light. Not after the footage, the documents, the truth she had tried to bury. Instead, she called her own mother. When the call connected, Emma finally broke. "Mom," she sobbed, I did something terrible, and Mark left with the kids." Her mother's voice on the other end was shocked, worried, and probing, but Emma could barely explain through the tears. Eventually, her mother said gently, "Come here. Right now. You shouldn't be alone." Emma nodded even though her mother couldn't see her. She hung up, wiped her face, and took a deep, shaky breath. Her steps toward her car were slow, heavy, as though each one acknowledged a truth she had avoided for years. She needed help. Real help. And whether she liked it or not, this was the beginning of her reckoning. She drove away from the neighborhood quietly, her taillights fading into the snowy night. She wasn't heading home. She wasn't heading toward Mark. She wasn't heading toward confrontation. She was heading toward the first consequence, the one that comes before redemption. Facing herself. The morning after Christmas felt gentler than the night before. Soft winter light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the living room where the children still slept curled together on the couch. Their small breaths rose and fell in peaceful rhythm, a comforting contrast to the turmoil unfolding outside these walls. I stood for a moment just watching them, their innocence, their trust, their unspoken belief that adults could fix what was broken. It reminded me of the responsibility I carried, not out of obligation, but out of love. I covered them with another blanket and moved into the kitchen, letting the familiar scent of coffee fill the air. Years ago, when Richard was alive, our mornings began just like this, slow, quiet, steady. I felt his presence again, not as a haunting, but as a guiding warmth. He had always believed I was stronger than I appeared. I hadn't always believed that myself. But now, with Mark hurting and the children seeking safety, I realized that strength wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Sometimes it was simply being the one person who didn't break. Mark joined me a few minutes later, his hair tousled, his eyes tired but softer than before. "Morning, Mom," he murmured, leaning against the counter. I handed him a cup of coffee, and he accepted it with a grateful nod. "They slept well," he added, glancing toward the living room. "Better than I did." I smiled gently. "Your mind is full, dear. That's normal. But the children rest because they feel safe here. And so should you." He exhaled slowly, shoulders dropping as though the house itself was easing his burden. "I didn't realize how long I've been tense," he admitted. "How much pressure I've been living under." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Being here, it feels like breathing again." His words warmed me more than the coffee. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't vindication. It was healing, the kind that comes quietly, one breath at a time. We sat at the table together, the morning light softening the lingering shadows of the night before. Mark finally spoke again, his voice more stable. "Mom, I want you to know something." I looked at him calmly, waiting. "No matter what happens with Emma, I'm not going to let anyone push you out of my life again. Or out of the kids' lives. That was my mistake. and I won't repeat it." His eyes glistened with sincerity, and I felt a deep peace settle in my chest. I reached over and placed my hand on his. "Families bend, Mark. They bruise. But they don't have to break. What matters is that we mend what can be mended and protect what needs protecting." He nodded, absorbing the words quietly. For the first time in a long while, he didn't seem conflicted. He seemed anchored. Just then, the children stirred and wandered sleepily into the kitchen. They climbed onto Mark's lap, wrapping their arms around his neck. He held them close, eyes closing for a moment as he kissed the tops of their heads. I watched them, feeling the house lighten with every passing second. This, the warmth, the unity, the fragile but real sense of safety, was what Emma couldn't control or destroy. Not because she lacked power, but because she lacked truth. Strength, I realized, wasn't loud or forceful. Strength was quiet. Strength was steady. Strength was love that doesn't collapse under pressure. And in this home, surrounded by my son and grandchildren, that strength was finally being restored. News in families moves faster than wind. Sometimes whispered, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes softened, but it always reaches the people it needs to reach. And in our family, the truth about Emma began spreading quietly, one concerned phone call at a time. It started with Mark's sister, who had already sensed something wrong long before the evidence surfaced. Then his aunt called. Then his cousin. All of them asking the same gentle question. "Is everything okay?" Mark didn't give details, but he didn't hide the truth either. "We're taking some space," he said. "The kids and I are with Mom." By afternoon, my phone began ringing too. Relatives who hadn't called in months suddenly reached out, offering support, holiday greetings, or simply wanting to understand what had shaken the usually peaceful family rhythm. I kept my responses steady. "The children are safe. Mark is here. We're taking things one step at a time." I didn't mention the theft, the footage, the manipulation. That was Mark's story to tell, not mine. But the family sensed enough to know that this wasn't an ordinary marital disagreement. While I spoke on the phone, Mark helped the children build a puzzle on the living room floor. It was a simple Christmas scene, a fireplace, stockings, a family gathered together. Yet watching them piece it together felt symbolic. Every little piece found its place again. Every bit of chaos formed a picture when handled with care. That quiet, healing energy filled the house like a balm. Later in the afternoon, Mark's sister arrived at my doorstep unannounced. Her eyes were glossy, her coat still dusted with snow. Before she even stepped inside, she wrapped her arms around Mark in a long, tight embrace. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how bad it was." Mark didn't speak for a moment. He just held his sister, finally allowing himself to rest in someone else's understanding. When they came inside, she sat beside me on the couch. "Margaret, thank you." I tilted my head, unsure. "For what, dear?" "For protecting him," she said softly, even when he didn't know he needed protecting. Her words touched a place deep inside me, the part of a mother that often doubts if she's doing too much or too little. I squeezed her hand. That's what mothers do. We stand guard, even when others forget to look. She nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. But not everyone reacted with quiet sympathy. Within hours, a few distant relatives sent messages filled with judgment. "Are you sure separation is the right choice?" one asked. "Children need both parents," another insisted. Mark saw the messages and closed his phone with a sigh. "Everyone has an opinion," he murmured, "but nobody knows the truth the way we do." I touched his shoulder gently. "Let the truth speak for itself. It always does." As evening approached, the family dynamic took another shift. Mark's uncle called, offering to help with legal advice if needed. His cousin texted to check on the children. One of his nieces sent a voice note saying she loved him. Support arrived from unexpected corners, and it softened Mark's posture, loosening years of emotional tension he had never noticed tightening in his body. But beneath all the compassion and concern, there was another feeling emerging among the family members, a sense of relief. Not that Emma was gone, but that the truth had finally surfaced. For years, many had felt something off, but no one had proof, and no one wanted to intrude. Now, with honesty on the table, everything made sense. The distance, the tension, the quiet changes in Mark's personality. As we sat together that evening, the children playing quietly at our feet, I realized something important. Families fracture when lies enter the foundation. But families heal when truth finally takes its place. And today, the truth had finally taken its seat at the table. The sun was beginning to set when the house finally quieted. The soft glow of the Christmas lights reflected off the windows, casting a warm shimmer across the living room. Mark sat beside me on the couch, the children curled up against us, their small hands tangled with ours. It was the kind of peaceful closeness I hadn't felt in years, not because it was never possible, but because something had always stood in the way. That something was now gone, and in its place was a fragile but honest sense of healing. Mark looked down at his children, brushing a lock of hair from his daughter's forehead. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what happens with Emma. But today I feel like I can breathe again." There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, just truth. Gentle, raw truth. The kind that rebuilds instead of destroys. I nodded, feeling a warmth spread across my chest. One day at a time, dear. Healing never arrives all at once. It arrives like this, quietly. The children stirred and looked up at us with sleepy eyes. Grandma, the oldest, whispered, "Are we going to have Christmas here every year now?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "As long as you want to," I said. "This home will always be yours." She smiled, a small but genuine smile, the kind that told me she felt safe again. The kind that told me she knew, even if she couldn't articulate it, that love lived here in a way it didn't elsewhere. Mark turned to me then, his eyes full of gratitude. "You saved us, Mom," he said. "You saved our family." I shook my head gently. "No, dear. The truth saved you. I just made sure it had a place to land." Sometimes people need someone who refuses to bend under the pressure of lies. Someone who stands steady until others find their way back. That was all I had done. The work of a mother whose love hadn't dimmed with age. The room fell into a gentle silence, broken only by the hum of the heater and the distant chime of a neighbor's wind bells. It felt like the world outside had paused for a moment, allowing us to breathe, to rebuild, to begin again. I looked at Mark, then at the children, and felt the kind of deep certainty that only comes after storms, the certainty that we would be all right. Before putting the children to bed, Mark knelt in front of me and took my hands. His voice trembled not with fear, but with emotion. "Mom, tomorrow I want to talk to a lawyer. I need to understand my rights. I need to protect the kids. And maybe Emma too, in a different way." I nodded, proud of the strength he was stepping into. "You're doing the right thing," I said. "Protection doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it just means clarity." He exhaled, relieved. "Yes, clarity. I can work with that." Later, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into a comforting stillness, Mark stood at the doorway wrapped in one of Richard's old coats. "Before I go to bed," he said softly, "I want to make a promise." I looked up at him, heart open. "What promise is that, dear?" He lifted his chin, eyes shining with resolve. "That no one, no mistake, no lie, no marriage, will ever come between us again. You're my mother, and I promise I will never let you be pushed away from this family." I felt tears rise, not from pain, but from a tender kind of joy. "Then I will make you a promise too," I whispered. "I will keep this home open. For you. For the children. For truth. Always." He smiled, a real, honest smile, and kissed my cheek before turning off the lights. And as I sat in the quiet glow of the Christmas tree, I felt a peaceful certainty settle in my soul. Truth had come home. My family had come home. And this Christmas, despite everything, had given us the greatest gift of all, a new beginning.